Thank you for having us here. We're really excited to talk about this project any chance we get. It's a great building, it's a great story, and it's a great client, and you really need all of those things to come together to achieve a project like this. Real quickly, just to say a little bit more about LS3P, for those of you who may not know us, we are a multidisciplinary architecture, interior design firm with 8 offices in North Carolina, South Carolina, and recently in Georgia. And got a lot of history here in North and South Carolina. So we had some of the other projects that talked a little bit about some of the both opportunities and constraints in working with their clients before in the case studies. Luckily, one of the things that was not a big constraint for us was a small checkbook. And when we talk a little bit more about this project, I think it's pretty easy to see why. So with that, let me tell a little bit about who our client was, how we ended up designing and getting this job, and then unfortunately, I don't have a lot of exciting IBC table slides, code sections, but I've only got some pictures. So it goes. All right, so obviously, everybody uses a bank, right? Anybody in here not use a bank? Everybody uses a bank. Well, one of the things that became very apparent to us when we started this project and engaging with this client is a lot of our perceptions and assumptions about what is a bank or how is banking conducted, whether or not it's retail or business, are really quite different from the banks that you and I grew up with. I would wager that a lot of people grew up in a time when this is what their impression of banking was about. It was fundamentally a different thing. Banks were pillars of the communities. They wanted to be institutions that were recognized because of their security and their solidity and their sovereignty, and they were safe. So part of what they were trying to do was inspire confidence in their customers. Also, they typically dealt with, and I'm going to try and use multiple pointers here. They typically dealt with actual exchanges of physical currency. Again, whether or not it was retail or business banking, but that's very different from how most people bank today. Today, what we see in banking is really a lot about transparency and openness. These banks, they are constantly evolving, and technology has provided just such an amazing vehicle in which they can do business faster and more efficiently. It's really changed the way banks operate, and it's also changed the way that people interact with banks. This bank that you see here on the bottom left-hand corner is Umpqua Bank in San Francisco, and it literally, a lot of their customer interface is something like out of the movie Minority Report, if you've seen that movie. That's very, very digital oriented. The trend that we're seeing is you're still seeing personal interaction, but you're seeing it in different ways. It's much more informal and personal on a one-to-one level. It's not behind a wire grate. So just to spend a few minutes to talk about who this client was. Live Oak Bank is a bank that is based in Wilmington, North Carolina, and I would wager that unless any of you are a small business owner, you've probably never heard of them. And the reason behind that is they are exclusively a small business lender that basically functions entirely online. And they were founded pretty recently as far as banks go. I mean, there's some statistics up here, or I can see this. They were founded in 2007. Last year, they actually became publicly traded on the NASDAQ. They are currently ranked number 3 for small business lenders in terms of volume, which is pretty amazing for a bank that is really only 8 or 9 years old. They have 312 employees, and in 2015, they had loan production of $820 million. So it's an incredibly profitable company. And because of their success, that was one of the reasons why they're experiencing annually about a 40% growth. That's great for architects and people who need to design facilities for them. So how do we get this job? This, to me, is also an interesting part of the story that I want to talk a little bit about. We got this job. I don't know exactly how business or politics work in a lot of South Carolina towns, but Wilmington, to some degree, is a good old boy network, and a lot of what you do is who you know. So we were asked to basically participate in a small invited competition for some local architects based on some of the professional relationships that some folks in our company had with the members that were founders of Live Oak Bank. And as far as competitions go, we failed, actually, pretty miserably the first time that we got in front of them and said, here's what we think you should do. And luckily for us, they said, well, we really like your firm, we really like what you said, but we really didn't like what you showed us. How about you go back in 2 or 3 weeks and show us something new again? So talk about a really rare opportunity to be able to come back to the drawing board. It was very fortunate, and I think we were lucky that they listened to as much as what we had to say to them as what we were also trying to show them. So we took a little bit different approach when we came back to them with what ultimately ended up being built and as our concept for the first building. We realized that because they were new and they were an entity that didn't have a physical home, this whole process of building and design and construction was very foreign to them. So we had a big learning curve about how do you even communicate your idea and the information and what you want to provide for them. So we started using things that we thought would be both romantic and familiar to them. We looked at some actual built precedents, some things that they could see and understand that, oh, there's a lot of similarities in what that might be and what our bank might be. We looked at a lot of the aspects of the site itself. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the trees. The site was a relatively undeveloped land that had been held by a local Wilmington family for over better part of 100 years. It was a pine tree stand, and a lot of the trees on the site, these were, if you're familiar with the naval stores industry, they were mined for their turpentine, and until steel shipbuilding became the norm, this site had a number of pitch trees that had been mined for their tar to go into tar and pitch for the shipbuilding. And of course, much like the low country of South Carolina, Wilmington has a lot of the live oaks, moss in the trees, just great inspirations. So when we came back to them, we really started to talk about visually what does this place want to be? How are you going to live in it? What's it used for? And what is your big idea for it? Immediately, they latched onto this idea of Chip Mahan, the founder of the company. He is basically a self-made man and grew up in rural Kentucky, and he talked a lot about his history outside Frankfort in barns. So barns were a very kind of natural thing to him, and they're also very rooted in the nature of southeastern North Carolina. So this idea of a barn in the woods was a very kind of compelling idea for what a corporate headquarters might be. They're really kind of two counterintuitive things. But we pretty quickly found that this idea about a cypress barn and using it as a way to launch into what a design might be was something that really helped out sell our message. We also pretty quickly started looking at not just floor plans, because again, that was something they really had challenges understanding, but visualization that they could understand, three-dimensional things, how these spaces looked from the inside, and what their project might look like from the outside. because we had really talked about the barn as a jumping off point for the design and some of the natural beauty of the existing site, why wood was basically a very easy kind of next step for us. They talked about one of their precepts for how they like to operate is they wanted to be as uncorporate as a company as possible. They talked a lot about if we can conduct business in a corporate living room, that's what we want to do. So a lot of that really started to just reinforce all the ideas about, well, wow, wood is such a great thing. It has warmth. People associate with it. You understand it. And it has a lot of different connotations other than a corporate commercial banking headquarters. I mean, that's literally why I came up with the theme of this is it's just not your grandfather's bank. Want to talk a little bit just about the site and where this is because I think it helps put the project in the context a little bit. You can see here that we've got a big undeveloped site all around us that was basically part of where our building once went. We had to build a regional stormwater pond. Stormwater is as big of a concern in development and design in Wilmington as anything, that and our wind loads. Because we're so flat, we really have to be careful about how we handle stormwater. So here's our project site. These are two main arterial roads in Wilmington that link to major shopping, commerce, and residential areas close by. One thing to note, this is a Verizon call center, and you can probably tell from the aerial there's a giant sea of parking in the front. And I'll talk about this a little bit later. One of the things that we learned from working with this client is when they couldn't tell us things that they did like, it was very easy for them to tell us things they didn't like when they saw them. And this notion of what an office building and a parking lot was not something that they wanted to be. So again, just looking a little bit at the floor plan, it's a plan that is really kind of funky shaped for an office building. I mean, most of you, when you think of an office building, it's a square or a rectangle. Ours is not, and it's not intentionally that way because one of the things that we really wanted to try to do in talking with them was to blur the lines between interior and exterior. We wanted to do that with the materials. We wanted to do it with glass. But we also wanted to do it with the shape of the building and actually bring a major outdoor courtyard inside basically the building itself. This did a lot of things. Wilmington and I'm sure a lot of places here in South Carolina, we have such a great climate for so much of the year that we really can use a lot of these outdoor spaces. So that was another way that we wanted to try to engage the inside with the outside. Lastly, you see there's two wings to this project. The entire inside of this, you'll see it in a minute, is all glass. And they wanted to create a corporate fishbowl where folks that were working here could look across and see what their counterparts were doing, and it just helped them feel like they could connect to one another and foster a sense of collaboration, even though you're on completely different sides of the building. Just a couple more aspects about the plan. This is the main entry for the project, and I'll hit on this when we talk a little bit more about some additional slides that we'll see. When we first started for the bank, this building here was designed originally for 18 people. And they said, well, we're just a really small internet bank that's more like a think tank than a real bank. So we really don't feel like we'll have any visitors. We don't really need a lobby. We want to be this quiet little barn in the woods that we really don't think we'll have a lot of interaction with the outdoor world. Well, that vastly changed as we went through the programming, and it also changed as they have now lived in the building. But there are also some other common amenity aspects, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this when we see some more photos. So how did we use wood in this project? Some of the other case studies that we talked about really, I think, focused a lot today on using wood as structure. And we've talked about this project here and how that also has a great impact on your perception of the building. And it's a great thing to be able to use it structurally. But one of the other ways that we wanted to push the nature a little bit of how we use wood in this is we also use it as the skin and the envelope for the building. Fundamentally, it's a different type of wood, and I'll talk a little bit about this as we get into it. The primary structure was glulam, and we're going to see some other king post truss and some other types of design that goes into that. But the exterior skin of this building was a locally sourced cypress. And that was something that you'll hear is, I think, a real trend of this bank. They really like the idea of the cypress wood for a lot of different reasons. Again, it was a way to tie it to its place. It's an indigenous material. It's beautiful. It'll age and change over time, but it also, functionally, it's rot resistant. It's resistant to a lot of the insects that we have in southeastern North Carolina too. Pretty quickly, when we got into the nuts and bolts of the design, we realized that glulam was going to be one component of this. Obviously, with a building that is modern and has a lot of the glass and the HVAC and some of the spaces we needed, we knew that this was going to be a hybrid of a lot of different construction types. And that actually was probably one of the neater parts of this, because it's pretty rare that you get to have this hybrid where you have other structural frame components, whether it be cast in place or precast concrete or conventional heavy steel construction. This was a project where we really got to see a lot of these interesting kind of intersections between different construction types. We have talked a little bit about code systems and the code implications for that. Just like some of the other folks were saying earlier, we treated this as a Type 5B construction so that we could take all the advantages of unprotecting or not having to protect the actual wooden systems, but still integrate in the non-combustible structural systems. Obviously, the business occupancy helped out in that, as did the frontage and a sprinkler system. So we were able to utilize some aspects of the code really to our advantage, even though we're mixing construction types. I know some of the people were asking earlier about who were the fabricators. We worked with Structural Wood Systems out of Greenville, Alabama, that did the glulam design and fabrication for us. Mentioned again a little bit about the skin. The cypress is really something that is unusual to see in larger scale commercial construction. We had to really think a lot about how that was going to be installed, how it would move and expand and age over time, and interface in with a lot of different materials. Some of these slides that you see here, basically we have a metal stud construction for our exterior walls with the gypsum sheathing, and then we have a fluid applied air barrier, because we knew that with all of the shims and the attachment and the nailing, we really needed a really good tight envelope to go behind the cypress cladding. And it was really interesting to see when it started going on, and we had to learn on the fly a lot about how do these little flashings and little corners and things really want to be detailed when you get into this scale of construction in a commercial building. So what does all this start to look like when it comes together? We talked a little bit about the transparency of the buildings and talked about this notion of bleeding interior and exterior space. You can start to see here just some of the views from the corners of the project. This is a section through the site and the building where you can see there are really thin bars. This is that same office wing up above, and each one of these bars are only about 28 to 30 feet wide. So you're always very, very close to the outside environment and the natural light. We really tried hard to figure out a way to incorporate in operable windows, but just given the humidity and the client and the climate and how we thought basically a corporate user would use this building, that wasn't something that ultimately we were able to achieve. But still, getting that real proximity to natural daylight for as many people as possible, we think really, really kind of made for a nice space. And again, this is another one of the wings that you can see. Pat was mentioning it earlier. Just talk about a great place to want to work. I tell the guys all the time over there that if they really want a full-time corporate architect to come live on campus, just call me up and I'll leave LS3P anytime. So, but it's a really nice space. And there are a lot of different ways, again, still just beyond the skin and the structure, that we tried to incorporate wood. I mean, here in this project or this image, you can see that we do have some interior offices that have a red oak stained interior storefront with glazing. We also have cypress panels, which are actually a really interesting kind of hybrid system where we had our mill worker build skins that would adapt to a standard Herman Miller systems furniture type of project. So we were constantly trying to find ways to integrate in modern conveniences, the technology, the benefits of commercial construction with a lot of the other benefits and I call it romantic qualities of all the wood. So speaking of amenities, amenities are extremely important to this client. You can probably tell from this picture that this thing's got a mind of its own. Amenities are incredibly important to them. The average age of their employee is 29 years old. So they have a very active, outdoors-oriented group of people. And they really feel like there's a big benefit for increasing, to the extent they can, employee wealth and not just wealth, but benefit, wellness and health. So they have a full-time fitness instructor and a nutritionist that are there. And it doesn't matter what time of the day you go by here, you see people working out. I don't know how people get a lot done here, but people are always either in this space or they're always in another space that I'm going to show you in a minute. Because they have such a great amenity, though, one of the things that we've heard back as feedback from this client is we amenitize things so much that we don't want our employees to ever leave. I mean, you don't want to say that from an exploitation sense that we want them to live here, but literally these people spend so much time, they live here. So they see a much greater kind of return on capital productivity because they provide these amenities. And because they're also trying to grow at about 40% a year, they really have to do a lot to recruit and retain the best talent that they have. Again, just a few pictures. This is the inside of the fishbowl that I was talking about. So you can just see the idea of really trying to contrast the solid to the void, the very kind of linear, stick-built nature of the Glulam with the very planar aspect of the curtain wall. It's just really a really nice contrast. We did also have some complementary materials that we started to introduce in, and we did that where it made sense from a special use or a programmatic point of view. Here you can see this is one of their executive boardrooms, and we actually started to use a third material, which is aluminum composite paneling, when we tried to differentiate the special spaces. Obviously, the exception to the rule sometimes when you have a pallet also is just a nice way to counterbalance the wood and the glass that we had. Again, you can see we made a lot of attempts when there were natural aspects of the site that we wanted to preserve and use as part of the building. We tried to really incorporate that into the experience. This is actually one of the Naval Stores trees that I was telling you about earlier. And they were pretty easy to find on the site because they would have 8 to 10 feet of V-grooves cut in their trunks. And as they grew up, over the years, you can still see them as kind of wounds for what they were used for. But we thought it was important to try to call, or pay homage to those things when we found them and could do it on the site. When we did have some of the larger volumes, this is the two-story common area in the first building. Again, out to the left, you can see that exterior courtyard. But we did have a number of spaces where, due to the spans, we really wanted to try to play up the aspect of what could wood as structure do for you, that it doesn't really, you don't get a lot of these benefits if you're using concrete beams. Or, to some degree you can do it with metal structure or trusses. But again, trying to use that as just, again, a poetic response to how the wood actually behaves and integrating in these king post trusses, it really just kind of opened up things dramatically and changed the volumes of these spaces. I mentioned working with structural systems. Similar to what the guys at the YMCA had described, our structural engineer on that project was Woods Engineering, who's a local structural engineer in Wilmington. There was a back and forth kind of design intent dialogue that happened with this fabricator as we went through with the design. So we had a chance to actually talk about how big are these clevises? What diameter do these rods really want to be, or how small can they be? And that was an important part of the design and making sure that not only did they work, but they were elegant and beautiful. One of the things that we did as part of a collaboration, the owner had an interior designer that they had worked with both on their homes and some of the earlier office projects that they had done as part of their startups many, many years earlier. And on her staff, she had an in-house custom lighting and furniture builder. So we got a chance to do a lot of these very custom lights. And it was really important that she was part of the design process, because the furniture and the artwork were, in my opinion, as important to pulling this project off as any of the, the architecture and the skin. We at LS3P, we did design and we called out all the finishes, so the floors, the ceilings, the walls. But having Susan Bozeman and her group out of Atlanta to be a design partner to complement that with custom lighting, custom furniture was really neat. I'm not sure it shows up in any of these pictures, but in some of the cases we had to actually cut down a few of the Naval Stores pine trees to make room for either the building or certain parts of the parking lot. But when we did that, Skylar, who was her furniture builder, found these ingenious ways to make pieces of artwork or tables that ended up in the building itself, so that these really neat relics weren't just thrown out or recycled, but they became part of the story. We ended up here today, a large part because of the Woodworks Design Award process. I know that Pat had connected with me as part of seeing this, and we've been very fortunate to tell this story and have it be recognized. Obviously everyone likes awards, but again, I think the story is really nice, and it's been a great, great success story for us. But it's also been very, very successful for this owner. I told you about how they are rapidly, rapidly growing. Well, that didn't stop when this building was finished, because the day that they moved in, by the time they moved people from their swing spaces that were already full, the building on day one was twice the capacity that it was designed for. So we had originally designed for 75 to 80 people, and there were, I think, 145 people in this building the day that it opened. So that's a problem, right? No, it's a great opportunity, because the only thing better than doing one of these projects is doing a second one. So because they had a problem, and we were able to help them with their problem, they came to us and they said, we really need to accelerate and think about how our campus grows and what is our next step. We need more space. We need a different set of users. We need new types of amenities, more outdoor spaces. But we're so happy with the kit of parts and the inspiration and the design to help us continue that vision. So what I think we're going to talk about in the second half of the story is the second building. This is the second building, which is not quite twice the size. The first building was 34,000 square feet. The second building is 55,000 square feet. It houses 210 employees, but it's also got, again, a major amenity component that I'll talk about in a second. When we knew that the bank's growth was really going to start to be something that was important and factor into not just building one, but what happened afterwards, we really thought it was a good idea to kind of take a step back as building one was in construction and understand that we needed to design a chassis for this campus and this corporation. So that's what we did. Building 2 that you saw in that slide is here. We're currently under design for Building 3, which will be another plus or minus 220 people, and a parking garage. Because if you remember seeing that slide of the Verizon call center earlier, there was just an immense sea of parking out front. And that's just not something that a client that wants to be a small barn in the woods wants to have as their front door. So we're looking at ways to very, very selectively integrate in both surface parking with the existing trees and push some structured parking over to the side. So the story continues on for us. Some of these are a little washed out, but when we started having, again, conversations with the owner about what exactly do you want the next building to be, we changed our tactics a little bit because we had had such a steep learning curve the first time in how we presented our idea and what we understood that they could and could not read in terms of graphics and communicating the design intent. This time around, we worked almost exclusively in 3D imagery. And it really kind of built from a watercolor drawing that we had done to, again, going back and helping them try to visualize what are those spaces and what are those volumes like? What will it feel like to you to be in them? And we were much more successful, and the process was a lot linear. I'm going to say that was due to our changing tactics, but it was also due, really, to be honest, that they had such a crunch and they needed to get bodies in seats that they trusted us a lot more. Just a little bit more about the design of the second building. If you remember, one of the things I talked about in the very first building, they said that currently we're a small company that really we don't envision ourselves having a lot of public interaction. Well, that definitely proved not to be the case after they met their success and they understood how many days a week the FDIC regulators were there doing audits and how continually they needed to bring in new clients. So what ultimately happened as a program shift for the second building was we decided that the second building was really going to become the front door to the campus and to this corporation. So we really had to start thinking about doing a different kind of scale and a different sense of entrance and importance to this as a client. We looked at a big volume. Again, we'll show some pictures of this. A big volume of a lobby as opposed to literally a 8 by 12 room that you walk in and there's a small reception desk in. Brand identity. It was, again, something that they felt like was really important, and we'll show you some more slides here in a minute of kind of how that progressed. Finally, when we got to the latter steps of design, we were able to really, and I think most architects are doing this day, really try to photorealistically help them understand this is what you're going to get. Now, again, a fundamental kind of difference of this building to the first building, if you see here, we've got this wonderful lake in front. And I don't know about South Carolina, but in Wilmington and places where we have so many of these stormwater ponds, they can be designed either very poorly or they can be designed as very, very nice amenities and assets. Well, I think because the stormwater pond was in construction at the same time as Building 1, we didn't have quite the understanding of how nice of an amenity this was going to be. It ended up being about a 3.5 acre lake. And when we saw how nice it ended up being, we really thought, because this second building is fundamentally and functionally a little different, and because we have this great lake, let's really use that as the opportunity to have the building have this dialogue with the lake. On the other side of the lake is a natural wildlife conservation easement that is never going to be built on. So again, what great foreground to a continued stand of longleaf pines could you have other than this great natural lake feature? Well, man-made lake feature. Just to look at the floor plan a little bit, if you remember the first building was very narrow, very, very thin and U-shaped. This building is really functionally designed to have a lot more open office workspace. The types of people that they were needing to accommodate, they really did not need everyone to have a closed office. And they really didn't want that because part of their whole mantra for success is collaboration. So that's why the building is, one, longer and skinnier, and the lake is up here. This is also true north. So in addition to having the benefit of all the views to the lake, you've got all this great diffuse north light, which we all love light, but if you work on a computer, you know it can be a real pain in the butt if you don't control the glare and the contrast. So one of the really, really special aspects of this is they said during design, to continue on with our theme of employee wellness and health, we want to have a 130-seat self-contained employee restaurant that we will own and operate and staff, and we're going to hire a chef, and they have great connections with local farmers, and we're going to basically have locally sourced food, and we're going to subsidize it so our employees basically get it at cost. It's like, sure, great, we can do that. So that really became a great anchor point. Just to reorient you with the plan, so the Grove restaurant really becomes this kind of end cap to the courtyard of the first building, and it's really the kind of stitch that holds these two buildings together. Similar to what we had done in the first building, we carried through using wood both as structural elements as well as skin. It's a little hard to see from some of these pictures, but again, we tried to always play up these connections between different structural systems and really kind of use them as part of the expression of the building. Because this building was so much larger and it needed much bigger spans, clear floor areas, we utilized in the second building probably about 2/3, I'm going to call it conventional heavy steel framing. We had some really big spans, and due to the height, and it just made a lot of sense that we could do certain aspect of the building with a structural steel system. But we knew how important that character was in the first building for the special spaces. So what we really tried hard to do in the special spaces on the second building was that's where we integrated in our Glulam and our special, complementary wood structural system. So here again, you can see a lot of the hybrid of different materials. These are the paired Glulam columns that are going up in the Grove restaurant. This is the third floor, which is kind of like their trading floor, which I'll show you some pictures of. So the lake is over here to the left. And it's a little difficult to see. Again, I apologize for the pictures, but we ended up with all these really interesting connections between different structural systems. And again, it's just something that you don't get to use and you don't get to express very often. So it's just a great kind of design opportunity. The skin, again, I think we learned a lot of lessons on the first building, so there was less of a learning curve here. One of the things that I think is interesting to note is the building is very different on the south side than it is on the north side, which faces the lake. And again, that's intentional. We're trying to be smart with our passive design. We use punch windows, and you can't see them in this construction photo yet, but we have louvered sunshades that protect all the south-facing openings. And also similar to what we had done in the first building here on some of the special programmatic elements, we used a third material, which this time we used a shiplap zinc paneling. So what does this building look like? Hopefully it kind of is a kissing cousin to the first building. This is the main lobby that you enter when you come in from the second building. The reception desk is there to the left, and out here, this is the view to the lake. There's a double height volume, which has a wooden cypress soffit that basically runs from interior to exterior. I'll try to show you some better pictures of this building. Because of its shape and its program, we couldn't physically match the shape to a point where inside and outside came together. So we tried to do a lot of that with materials, so that as your eye followed the roof line out, you saw that it was the same material inside as outside. And again, I think the furniture and the artwork were just such an important part of pulling off this concept of business in your living room. Again, just some pictures of what is that workspace like. The view out to the right, you can see the lake, and we just have almost complete floor-to-ceiling curtain wall. It was really a great opportunity to have that north light. And because this was a primarily an open office environment, that creates a different set of challenges for maintaining the sense of space and privacy versus openness and collaboration. And we talked a little bit about how through the workstation design and using the materials and the heights, we tried to address that. This is the Grove restaurant. You can see it's a big volume. I want to say it's about 18, 19 feet clear to the underside of that deck. And just like in the first building where we had these big long spans, we utilized the king post truss design. One of the things too that I'll say about Live Oak Bank is because they operate so much in the virtual world, during construction we get requests to put in 20-foot wide video matrix walls. So technology is something that is just totally critical to them, and it shows up all throughout their projects, which again is an interesting kind of counterpoint to the warmth in the wood that you see. I think it works well, but this restaurant is open 6 hours a day. They have greatly exceeded their expectations for level of meals or amount of service that they were anticipated to provide. I can't remember exactly how many cartons of eggs they said they go through a day, but it's a lot more than they anticipated. Again, just some pictures. The thing I think that to mention here is because this building was so much bigger and it was 3 stories, we tried to continually introduce in these double height volumes, whether it be with stairs or openings in the floors, because with the building being bigger, larger, and multiple floors, that just presented certain challenges to collaboration. In some ways, people would say it inhibits collaboration because people are further away and they just have less of a connection. So that was another way, like in the first building, where you could look across the courtyard and see someone actually in the same building. This was trying to accomplish the same goal, except you're doing it, from the interior. What's someone doing on the floor above or below you? A few more slides that talk about, again, just some of the architecture. This is on the right, the north curtain wall. A lot of these spaces, this is a covered walkway that connects Building 1 and Building 2. And this big volume here that you see glowing is the Grove Restaurant, which has outdoor terrace seating. And we really tried to play up that indoor-outdoor space. If you remember the conceptual rendering we showed of the building entry earlier, we had this kind of notion of somehow incorporating the logo into that. That was something that we ended up working with a local artist. His name was Glulam, who actually went to structural engineering school and became an artist. And he made a copper and stainless steel abstraction of the Live Oak Bank logo that basically got mounted onto the front of the building right at the front door. Just to give you a sense of scale, that's 28 feet tall. So it was a pretty neat undertaking to see that happen. And again, just the collaboration with all these people are what really, I think, made this project very successful. Another one, this is the trading floor on the top floor. There's an 8-foot wide terrace that runs down the length of about 2/3 of the building on the north side, which is right outside this room. So given the fact they have Wi-Fi throughout the office, there are people out there working on the terrace all the time. So again, it's just, we're very fortunate, and it was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for us to really work with a truly innovative client, and we're very happy to help them continue to grow their campus. And I'll leave you with this. They tell us all the time, and you hear it and it's kind of cliche, but good design equals good business. Well, that's something that Live Oak Bank, I think, really takes to heart, because we see it in how they use their actual facilities in their building as part of their branding and their marketing. They really try to promote what their environment is as much as they do their financial and their corporate kind of identity. So that's one really important piece about good design and good business. I mentioned the amenities and the environment as a whole. When they're growing like they are, employee satisfaction and, more importantly, sometimes retention is also just super important. So the better the environment and as good of amenities as they can provide, that's just going to help them do that. And finally, because they were a startup company that literally is still, to some degree, on the forefront of internet business banking, they wanted us to give them a place that provided them so many opportunities for collaboration and part of their staff that really fostered innovation, because that's really what built the company and made it a success. And hopefully we've done all of those things with the 2 projects that we've done for them so far.